The first thing the galaxy noticed was not Earth's anger. It was the absence of it. Namaris Reach had burned for 9 hours before the last light went out. A civilian frontier colony of glass farms, weather towers, school domes, and shallow ocean ports had been struck from orbit by the Kryth Dominion without warning, without negotiation, and without even the dignity of a declared war. By the time neutral satellites drifted close enough to see through the ash veil, the colony's blue-white cities had become black scars across the moon's surface, and the sea around the capital bay was boiling from the heat of impact. 12 million humans were listed as missing before the first official report had finished loading. Every empire prepared for the same thing. Earth would scream. Earth would send fleets. Earth would flood the channels with grief and threats and impossible promises of revenge. The old powers of the Galactic Inquiry Chamber had already begun drafting emergency containment resolutions before a single human representative arrived, because they believed they understood young species. Pain made them loud. Loss made them careless. Extinction-level grief made them predictable. Then Earth's delegation ship docked with the tribunal station, and only one man stepped out. Commander Elian Rusk was not dressed like a war leader. His dark civilian command coat carried no medals, no weapon seals, no heroic colors, nothing that demanded respect from species who measured danger in armor thickness and fleet tonnage. He was lean, quiet, and pale from too many hours under artificial light, with the tired eyes of a man who had read casualty reports until the numbers stopped behaving like numbers. In his right hand, he carried a cracked emergency beacon recovered from the ruins of Namaris Reach. On his left he carried nothing at all. The Kryth ambassador laughed when he saw him. It was a small sound, controlled and sharp, but it spread across the chamber like permission. Several delegates shifted in their seats. Others looked relieved. One human, no escort, no visible rage, no command fleet waiting in formation outside the station. This was not vengeance. This was grief arriving too weak to stand. But the laughter did not last. The first to go silent were the predator species. Not the diplomats trained to perform fearlessness, but the old blood observers seated along the upper crescent, the ones whose ancestors had survived by sensing danger before it showed teeth. Their eyes followed Elian Rusk as he crossed the black tribunal floor. A scaled admiral from the Vor Pact stopped tapping his claws against his chair. A six-eyed Karnath judge tilted her head very slightly, as if a sound had entered the room that no instrument could record. Even the Kryth honor guards, towering behind their ambassador in plated ceremonial armor, adjusted their stances without realizing they had done it. Elian did not look at any of them for long. That was what made it worse. His gaze passed over the chamber once, calm and complete, touching exits, guards, cameras, balconies, faces, distances, lies. Then he reached the central evidence table and placed the cracked beacon gently on the surface, as though setting down something alive. The presiding magistrate asked whether Earth wished to issue an accusation. Elian looked at the Kryth ambassador, and for the first time, the chamber saw something colder than anger in a human face. Not hatred. Don't panic. Not grief breaking open. Recognition. No, Elian said softly. Earth has already begun counting. The beacon clicked once. And from inside the broken device, in the voice of a child buried beneath a dead colony, the chamber heard a number repeat again and again. 9, 17, 17, 17. The first time the child's voice filled the Galactic Inquiry Chamber, no one moved. Even the translation bands embedded into the tribunal walls hesitated, searching for meaning inside a pattern that was not language, not distress code, not any recognized military cipher. It was only a voice, small and dry with recycled air, repeating two numbers from somewhere beneath a murdered world. 9, 17, 17. The Kryth ambassador stopped smiling. That was the first thing Elian Rusk recorded in his mind. Not the gasp from the lesser delegations. Not the sudden tightening of security around the central floor. Not the way 3 magistrates leaned closer as if proximity could make grief more understandable. He watched Ambassador Vake Tharuan, the polished face of the Kryth Dominion, and saw the moment the alien ruler recognized something he had not expected to survive. It lasted less than a second. A tiny stillness behind the eyes. A pause in the second throat membrane before it resumed its slow diplomatic flutter. Most species would have missed it. Elian did not. The presiding magistrate, an old silver-skinned arbiter from the neutral Lethros Combine, raised one narrow hand and ordered the chamber recorder to isolate the audio. The child's voice repeated again, stripped of static. This time, the whole chamber heard the fragile rhythm beneath it. The voice was not screaming. It was not calling for help. It was counting with deliberate control, as though someone had taught that child that panic was a fire, and numbers were a way to keep breathing. Ambassador Tharuan recovered his expression before anyone accused him of losing it. "A tragic artifact," he said, his voice carrying the smooth weight of rehearsed sorrow. But grief does not transform a frontier installation into a civilian settlement. The HFY Dominion regrets all unnecessary loss of life, yet we maintain that Namaris Reach housed unlawful surveillance architecture directed at sovereign HFY space. Several delegates shifted at that. Surveillance was a heavy word in the chamber. Turned victims into risks. It turned massacres into misunderstandings. It gave frightened governments a doorway through which they could escape moral responsibility without calling themselves cowards. Elian looked down at the cracked beacon. Its casing was burned along one edge, and a thin line of melted polymer had hardened across the emergency seal like a black tear. "Then you will have no objection," he said, "to the full release of your firing logs, target classifications, and strike authorization chain." A ripple passed through the Kryth delegation. Not outrage. Calculation. Tharuan's lower hands folded neatly beneath the table. Military records are not released to emotional parties during active inquiry. "Earth is not emotional," Elian said. The words were quiet, but the chamber changed around them. The predator species along the upper crescent became still again. It was not that they believed him. Everyone could see the exhaustion in his face. The grief pressed so deeply behind his eyes that it had become structure instead of expression. The unsettling part was that he had not denied grief. He had simply stated with almost mechanical precision that grief was not driving the process. That made several old instincts in the room wake up. The magistrate ordered the colony registry displayed. A pale hologram rose above the evidence table, rotating slowly. Namaris Reach appeared as it had been before the attack. 3 ocean settlements, 6 agricultural domes, a weather spine along the northern ridge, and a civilian observatory planted near the far crater line. Population records scrolled beside it. Teachers, hydroponic engineers, dock mechanics, children, medical staff, weather technicians. No planetary shield. No weapons grid. No fleet command relay. Tharuan's eyes narrowed. Civilian equipment can hide military function. So can diplomatic grief, Elian replied, and for the first time, a few delegates looked at Tharuan instead of the human. The Kryth ambassador's jaw plates tightened. He had expected rage because rage could be discredited. He had expected an accusation because the accusation could be buried under procedure. He had expected the human to demand blood, and the chamber to recoil from human savagery. He had not expected a man who asked for records as if the dead were still capable of testifying. The magistrate permitted one additional artifact from Earth's recovery archive. Elian touched the beacon once. Second file opened. This one was visual. The chamber lights dimmed, and a shaky interior feed appeared above the table. It showed darkness broken by emergency strips, dust floating in a narrow underground space, and small shapes huddled beneath thermal blankets. Children. Human children. Some old enough to understand fear. Some young enough to look confused by it. Their faces were pale in red light. A woman's hand moved through the frame, checking masks, tightening straps, pressing fingers to wrists. The audio returned. 9. 17. A second child whispered something too soft for the translation system. Then the first voice answered with the same numbers, steadier this time, as if correcting the room itself. Elian paused the feed before anyone could see more. A Kryth judge in the upper crescent spoke without waiting for permission. Why numbers? Elian did not look away from the frozen image. Because words can be misunderstood. Words can reveal names. Words can make children think about what is happening. Numbers give the mind a rail to hold in the dark. The answer moved through the chamber with more force than a shout. The smaller delegations, especially those with colonies near Kryth borders, began exchanging silent communications. The large empires remained still, but their stillness was no longer neutral. Something had entered the inquiry that could not be reduced to territory. It had a child's voice. Tharuin leaned forward. This proves nothing except that some civilians sheltered during a lawful strike against an illegal installation. Elian turned to him then. Slowly. Completely. Lawful strikes do not burn school domes first. The chamber became so quiet that the low hum of the station's environmental systems grew audible beneath the floor. Tharuin did not answer at once, and that delay mattered. Elian saw two neutral analysts mark it. He saw one Kryth glance downward. He saw the presiding magistrate's fingers stop moving over the inquiry slate. Then Tharuin gave the answer Elian had been waiting for. War is not clean, the ambassador said. Elian nodded once, as if a locked door had opened. No, he said. But lies are. They have edges. He requested permission to submit a timeline. The magistrate granted it with visible reluctance, aware that the chamber had already moved beyond the safe shape of a procedural hearing. A new hologram appeared beside the colony map. The last 12 minutes before impact. Kryth strike vessels entered the system from 3 angles. Their weapons charged before any warning was transmitted. Their first shots did not target the observatory. They did not target the docking port. They did not target the weather spine. They targeted residential heat clusters. Tharuin stood so quickly that his chair struck the floor behind him. That projection is fabricated. Elian did not blink. Then release the original logs. The trap was elegant because it did not look like a trap until the Kryth ambassador was already standing inside it. If he refused, the projection gained weight. If he complied, Earth gained access. If he attacked the evidence, the chamber would ask why a great dominion feared a dead colony's final 12 minutes. The magistrate turned toward Tharuin. Ambassador, will your government provide the requested logs? For the first time since Elian had entered the chamber, the Kryth delegation did not answer immediately. The cracked beacon clicked again without being touched. Every head turned back toward it. A new sound emerged beneath the child's numbers, buried so deeply in the damaged recording that the chamber system had only just separated it from the static. It was not a human voice. It was not a distress signal. It was a Kryth command tone, faint but unmistakable, speaking from inside the ruins of Namaris Reach after the Dominion had claimed every attacker had already left the system. And the voice said in clean military Kryth, Vault 17 is still breathing. The words did not echo through the chamber like an accusation. They slipped into it like a blade pushed slowly between armor plates. Vault 17 is still breathing. No one looked at Ambassador Vake Tharuin first. That would have been too obvious, too immediate, too close to admitting what every mind in the Galactic Inquiry Chamber had understood at once. Instead, they looked at the cracked emergency beacon on the evidence table, at the frozen image of children under thermal blankets, at the rotating colony map that still showed school domes marked as residential heat clusters. Only after those things had arranged themselves into something undeniable did the chamber begin, species by species, to turn toward the Kryth delegation. Tharuin's face had gone still in a way that was not calm. It was the stillness of a creature standing very near an edge and pretending there was no drop beneath it. That audio is corrupted, he said. Elian Rusk nodded once, almost gently. Then release the original logs. It was the same sentence as before, but it was no longer a request. It had become a measurement. Every time Tharuin refused, the The distance between his performance and the truth grew easier to see. Every time he spoke, the shape of the lie became cleaner. The presiding magistrate ordered a recess so the chamber's forensic systems could authenticate the extracted carriage command tone. It was a procedural move, meant to slow the panic before panic became political, but the pause only made the room more dangerous. Delegates withdrew into private tiers, security teams changed formation, and tribunal aides began moving with the quick, frightened efficiency of people who understood that a hearing had just become a crisis. Elian did not leave the central floor. He remained beside the evidence table while the chamber emptied around him, one hand resting near the cracked beacon but not touching it. From the upper crescent, several Predator delegates continued watching him with the same unease they had shown when he first entered. They had seen warriors rage, diplomats collapse, rulers threaten entire moons in moments of humiliation. They knew the patterns of anger. Elian Rusk did not fit them. He stood like a man listening to a sound no one else could hear yet, patient enough to let the universe make its mistake in full. A neutral investigator named Tovan Arl approached him during the recess. Tovan belonged to the Mirel Union, a species built thin and tall for low gravity, with translucent skin that showed pale gold veins beneath the surface. He had spent 40 years documenting border violations and had learned to distrust every empire equally, which was why the magistrates trusted him more than most. "You knew there was KRYTH audio inside the beacon," Tovan said. Elian looked at him, and the investigator felt, with sudden discomfort, that the human had already known he would ask that exact question. "I knew there was something inside it," Elian replied. "That is not an answer." "No," Elian said. "It is the limit of what I knew." Tovan studied him for a moment. "And the numbers?" 17. "You know what they mean." Elian's eyes moved once toward the frozen image above the table, where a child's face remained half-turned toward the camera, mouth open around a number the chamber had not understood in time. "I know what Earth thinks they mean." Before Tovan could press further, Elian picked up the beacon and activated a restricted projection. A second map appeared, smaller than the first and far more unsettling. It was not a map of Namaris Reach as the colony had been built. It was a map of what lay beneath it. Deep maintenance veins, pressure shelters, old storm cellars, emergency tunnels carved into bedrock during the first settlement years, when frontier colonists still assumed the universe might kill them by accident rather than intention. 9 marked structures pulsed in dim blue. Tovan's throat tightened. 9 vault networks. Elian said nothing. The 17th marker appeared last, buried beneath the Eastern School District. Tovan took one involuntary step closer. There were children inside. There were families inside, Elian said. Children were the ones calm enough to keep counting after the adults started running out of air. The investigator looked back at the frozen KRYTH delegation doors. Why would the Dominion remain after bombardment? That, Elian said, is the question they came here hoping no one would ask. When the chamber reconvened, the forensic confirmation had already spread through sealed diplomatic channels. The command tone was authentic. The voice belonged to a KRYTH strike officer attached to the Dominion's 7th Ash Fleet, a unit Tharuan had not included in the preliminary disclosure. That alone should have broken the KRYTH defense. But empires did not survive by admitting wounds when the knife first entered. They survived by making the knife sound like a misunderstanding. Tharuan returned with 3 legal advisors and a colder expression. The Dominion will not recognize illegally extracted battlefield fragments as admissible evidence. Elian watched him settle into place. Namaris Reach was not a battlefield until you made it one. The colony housed a deep listening array aimed at KRYTH sovereign corridors. It housed a civilian observatory, Elian said. A civilian observatory capable of monitoring military movement. A weather station can watch clouds, Elian said. That does not make clouds classified. A few delegates reacted before they could stop themselves. Not laughter. The moment was too grave for that. But something shifted. The KRYTH argument had begun to sound large and armored around a very small truth. They had burned children because they feared what a colony had heard. The magistrate demanded clarification on the observatory. Elian submitted the public construction record, the civilian funding ledger, the maintenance logs, and the school partnership documents. The Deep Listening Array had been built 73 years earlier to study dead stars along the border, because dead stars sometimes produced gravitational echoes that helped predict route instability. It had been maintained by 6 technicians, 3 graduate researchers, and a rotating group of students from the colony's upper learning dome. Then Elian submitted the final maintenance note from 6 days before the attack. The note was ordinary at first glance. A technician named Marapel had reported irregular echo patterns near an abandoned transit corridor called the Very Hollow. The array had detected repeating distortions where no active gate traffic was registered. She had flagged it for review, attached raw data, and written one sentence at the bottom. Something is moving where the maps say nothing can move. For the first time, several neutral worlds near Kryth territory began transmitting urgent requests to their own fleets. Tharuin noticed. His advisors noticed. The chamber noticed that they noticed. Elian let the silence work. Then he revealed the next piece. 6 days after that maintenance note, the Kryth 7th Ash Fleet entered the Namaris system under blackout formation. They did not jam communications immediately. They waited 17 minutes. Long enough for the observatory to transmit one compressed data burst toward Earth. Long enough for someone in Kryth command to realize the colony had already sent something out. Only then did the bombardment begin. The magistrate's voice lowered. "Commander Rusk, are you stating that Namaris Reach was attacked because of this observation?" "No," Elian said. "I am stating that the Dominion's own movements suggest they believed it was worth killing 12 million people to erase it." Tharuin rose again, but this time the movement looked less like offense and more like alarm. "You are building war from the shadows." Elian turned toward him with the same exhausted calm he had carried since docking. "No, Ambassador. We are building a grave from names. The war was yours." At that exact moment, the chamber doors opened behind the Kryth delegation. A tribunal security officer entered quickly, crossed to the presiding magistrate, and delivered a private alert. The magistrate read it once. Then again. The silver color drained from his face. Tovan Arl saw the change and felt the old instincts in the room tighten. The magistrate looked at Elian. "Commander Rusk, the Kryth Dominion has just declared the Namaris system closed by military quarantine." Elian did not seem surprised. The magistrate continued, voice thinner now. "They are blocking all recovery access. No neutral ships may enter. No Earth vessels may approach. They claim the ruins are unstable." Across the chamber, Tharuin's expression had become perfectly unreadable. Elian looked down at the cracked beacon, then at the frozen image of Vault 17, then finally at the rotating map of the dead colony whose deepest wounds were now being sealed away by the people who had made them. When he spoke, his voice was almost too soft for the chamber to catch. "Then they are still hiding something under the ash." The quarantine of Namaris Reach changed the inquiry from a hearing into a siege without weapons fired. Until that moment, the Kryth Dominion had been accused of a massacre. After that moment, every delegation in the Galactic Inquiry Chamber understood that the accused had just sealed the crime scene while the judge was still speaking. Ambassador Vake Tharuin did not deny the order. He did not need to. A great empire never admitted fear when policy could wear the same face. He rose slowly, adjusted the ceremonial folds of his ash-gray mantle, and informed the chamber that the Dominion had a moral obligation to prevent contaminated debris, unstable radiation fields, and unverified human recovery craft from spreading danger beyond the Namaris system. His words were clean. His posture was perfect. His explanation was so polished that several younger delegates looked relieved to have been given something official to believe. Elian Rusk only looked tired. That was what made the older species uneasy. He did not argue with the quarantine. He did not demand the magistrate override it. He did not threaten to send Earth's navy through the blockade. He stood beside the cracked beacon with one hand resting lightly on the evidence table, listening to Tharuin speak as though the Kryth ambassador were not defending himself, but helping Earth finish a calculation. The presiding magistrate asked whether Earth wished to file an emergency motion against the quarantine. "No," Elian said. The chamber stirred. Tharuin's eyes narrowed a fraction too late. Elian turned toward the magistrate. "Earth requests that the Dominion submit the names of every vessel currently enforcing the quarantine, every commander assigned to the perimeter, every authority that approved the closure, and every safety report used to justify the order." Tharuin's throat membranes flexed. "That is an absurd demand." "It is a simple one," Elian replied. "You said the quarantine is for safety. Safe operations have paperwork." The words landed harder than they should have because everyone in the room knew they were true. Civilizations could lie about morality. They could lie about motives. They could lie about victims and strategy and necessity. But they could not move fleets without leaving weight behind. Orders had to pass through channels. Fuel had to be allocated. Crews had to be notified. Navigation windows had to be opened. Somewhere, beneath all the grandeur of the Empire, bureaucracy kept the bones of truth. Tharuin recovered quickly. "The Dominion will provide a preliminary list within appropriate legal limits." "Now," Elian said. For the first time, the human's voice did not rise, but the words struck the chamber with the force of something sealed shut. Several Predator observers shifted again. Tovan Arl, watching from the neutral investigator's tier, felt the same sensation he had noticed before. Not aggression, not threat, but pressure. The kind of pressure a locked room feels when water begins entering beneath the door. The magistrate, now pale with the knowledge that history was leaning over his shoulder, ordered the Kryth delegation to submit the preliminary list under seal. Tharuin conferred with his advisors for 7 minutes. During those 7 minutes, no one spoke above a whisper. Elian remained still. The cracked beacon remained silent. Above the evidence table, the frozen map of Namaris Reach continued to rotate, showing 9 vault networks beneath a world the Dominion now claimed was too dangerous for witnesses to enter. At last, the HFY list appeared. 28 vessels. 9 perimeter commanders. 4 safety authorities. A clean chain of approval written in the careful language of emergency containment. The chamber exhaled. Then Elian said, "That list is false." Tharuin's head turned slowly. "You have not even reviewed it." "I reviewed the shape of it," Elian said. The Kryth ambassador almost smiled again, but this time the expression failed halfway through. "The shape?" "Yes." Elian touched his wrist console. A second list appeared beside the first, projected in cold blue above the tribunal floor. The formatting was human, spare and unforgiving. 41 vessels. 14 perimeter commanders. 7 hidden logistics tenders. 3 signal suppression craft listed under civilian registry shells. Fuel trails from 2 private depots. Replacement crew rotations requested 18 hours before the official quarantine order existed. The chamber went silent in pieces. First the neutral worlds. Then the Predator Crescent. Then the smaller trade alliances, whose survival often depended on recognizing when a large power had just been caught stepping over its own shadow. Tharuin stared at the blue list. "Fabrication." Elian nodded once. "Then release your full movement logs." Again the trap closed without sound. The Dominion's legal advisors began speaking at once, but the damage had already been done. Their voices overlapped in claims of sovereignty, emergency privilege, hostile intelligence collection, and procedural violation. Elian let them speak. He had learned long ago that frightened people often believed volume could replace direction. But every sentence they added gave the chamber something new to measure against the data. Every denial created another edge. Every edge made the lie easier to hold up to light. Tovan Arl requested permission to compare both lists through neutral routing records. The magistrate granted it. Tharuin objected. The objection was recorded. That mattered too. The first confirmation arrived 3 minutes later. A refueling buoy near the outer Namaris corridor had logged a heat signature matching a HFY logistics tender not listed in the Dominion submission. The second arrived 90 seconds after that. A civilian comm relay had recorded a burst of encrypted traffic from a vessel registered to a HFY agricultural ministry, though its engine profile matched a military suppression craft. Then a third confirmation. Then a fourth. By the fifth, no one was looking relieved anymore. Elian spoke only after the chamber had watched enough truth arrive without his help. "You asked why Earth did not send fleets first," he said quietly. "Because fleets make people look at weapons. We needed you to look at movement." Tharuan's mask cracked. "Not fully. Not dramatically. But enough. You have been spying on Dominion corridors." "No," Elian said. "We have been listening to the places where dead colonies used to speak." A coldness moved through the chamber. It was not metaphorical. Several species changed color. Others withdrew their limbs closer to their bodies. The words reached beyond Namaris Reach, beyond one murdered colony, into a larger darkness that many governments had carefully avoided naming. Missing settlements, failed border stations, silent outposts written off as storms, accidents, collapses, local conflicts, navigation errors. Every power had a few. Every power had decided, eventually, that some graves were too expensive to reopen. Humanity had not. Tharuan turned from Elian to the magistrate. "This inquiry is becoming a human weapon." Elian looked at him then, and the exhaustion in his face seemed suddenly older than grief. "No, Ambassador. It became a weapon when you used children as evidence disposal." The chamber recorder captured the sentence. So did every private diplomatic channel before the magistrate could seal the feed. The KRYTH delegation knew it immediately. Their aides bent over consoles, sending urgent containment orders to ships, ministries, allied governments, propaganda bureaus. But the phrase had already escaped into the architecture of the station. From there it passed into waiting relays. From the relays, into the hands of every world that had been watching the hearing with one eye and pretending not to care with the other. Tharuan's voice dropped. "You do not understand what you are provoking." For the first time since entering the chamber, Elian stepped away from the evidence table. Only one pace. But every armed guard noticed it. Every predator instinct in the upper crescent followed the movement. "No," he said. "That is what your Dominion never understood about us. We do not provoke easily." The cracked beacon clicked again. This time no one had touched it. No command had been entered. No technician had isolated a new layer. The damaged device simply woke under the chamber lights, as if some buried recording had been waiting for the right sequence of sounds around it. The child's voice returned, weaker than before. 9. 17. Then another voice followed it. "Adults. Humans. Barely alive. If anyone hears this, do not trust the first list." The adult voice should not have been there. For 3 seconds after it emerged from the cracked beacon, the entire Galactic Inquiry Chamber seemed to forget how to exist as a political body. No one objected. No one requested authentication. No one moved to seal the feed or bury the recording beneath the procedure. They simply listened, because the voice was not giving testimony from safety. It was speaking from under a dead world, through smoke, through heat, through failing power, through the last thin wall between buried survivors and the silence the Kryth Dominion had tried to leave behind. "If anyone hears this, do not trust the first list." The beacon hissed, coughed static, then continued. "They know which vaults are active. They are not searching for survivors. They are searching for witnesses." A sound moved through the chamber that was not quite a gasp and not quite a prayer. Several delegations understood at once. Others took a heartbeat longer, and that delay made the understanding worse when it arrived. The Kryth had not simply bombarded Namaris Reach and abandoned the ruins. They had stayed. They had listened beneath the ash. They had known human civilians were still alive, and they had not come down to rescue them. They had come down to find them. Ambassador Vake Tharuan stood rigid behind his table, every polished line of his diplomatic posture still in place, but his aides were no longer looking at him with confidence. They were looking at their own consoles, at sealed channels, at fragments of messages arriving too quickly to manage. The lie had grown faster than their ability to groom it. Elian Rusk closed his eyes for one brief moment. It was the first visible fracture in him since he had entered the chamber, and somehow that single moment of pain carried more weight than any shout could have. When he opened his eyes again, the fracture was gone, but no one mistook that for healing. The presiding magistrate ordered the beacon to continue. The image above the evidence table shifted from the frozen school vault frame to a darker recording. The picture was unstable, lit only by red emergency strips and the dull blue blink of a hand terminal. A woman appeared close to the lens, her face gray with dust, one cheek burned, lips cracked from dehydration. Behind her, children slept in rows beneath thermal sheets. Some were too still. Others moved faintly, their small hands wrapped around oxygen tubes as though gripping the idea of mourning. "My name is Mara Pell," the woman whispered. "Senior Maintenance Technician, Namaris Reach Eastern Observatory. If this reaches Earth, tell them Vault 17 remains active. Repeat, Vault 17 remains active. We have children from Districts 3, 5 and 9. Estimated survivors, 312. The number struck the chamber like a physical impact. 312. Not an abstraction. Not a casualty estimate. Not a statistical rounding hidden inside a government report. 312 children who had breathed beneath a murdered colony while empires argued over whether their world had been civilian enough to mourn. Elian did not explain immediately. He let the number enter the room and become too heavy to move. Mara Pell's recording trembled as something boomed faintly above the vault. Dust fell from the ceiling in thin streams. Several children woke up. One began to cry, and another child, older by only a few years, pulled him close and whispered the numbers again. 9. 17. 17. Mara turned away from the lens long enough to steady them. When she returned, her voice had changed. It was no longer the voice of a technician reporting damage. It was the voice of a human being deciding that fear would not be the last thing her people left behind. "They are using ground pulse scans. They have found Vault 2 and Vault 6. No rescue attempted. I repeat, no rescue attempted. HFY units deployed cutters at the access shafts. We heard screaming through the stone for 4 minutes. Then nothing." One of the smaller delegations left the chamber without permission. Their species had lost a mining colony near HFY space 8 years earlier. At the time, the Dominion had blamed volcanic collapse. Elian saw them go. Theruin saw him. The ambassador slammed one hand against his table. "This recording is an emotional weapon." Elian turned toward him slowly. "Yes." The answer stunned Theruin into silence. Elian's voice remained level. "It is the last weapon they had." The beacon continued before Theruin could recover. Mara Pell moved the camera toward a maintenance display, where sound waveforms crawled across a damaged screen. "They are transmitting on a buried tactical channel. I have captured partial command traffic. 7th Ash Fleet. Ground unit designations unknown. Repeating phrases appears in multiple orders. Witness extraction failure unacceptable. They are not here because they fear our weapons. We have none. They are here because the observatory heard something in the very hollow." The presiding magistrate leaned forward. "Pause recording." The chamber system froze the image. Mara Pell's face hung above the table, half-lit, exhausted, alive in the one way the Dominion had failed to prevent. The magistrate looked at Elian. "Commander, you knew survivors existed." Elian's gaze stayed on the frozen image. "We knew after the first rescue team reached the debris field." "Earth's Navy." "No." The word disturbed the chamber almost as much as the recording had. Elian touched his wrist console, and a new projection rose beside Mara Pell's face. Grainy rescue footage. Not military ships. Not armored carriers. Not the grand shape of vengeance descending from orbit. Small industrial craft pushed through the ash cloud with hazard lights blinking. Mining cutters, medical skiffs, civilian tugboats with scorched hulls. A school transport retrofitted with extra oxygen tanks. A weather maintenance crew flying without authorization because the official lanes were still burning. They were not ordered in, Elian said. They went because the beacon was still making noise. The footage showed a human miner in a cracked pressure suit crawling into a half-collapsed shaft while radiation alarms flashed across his visor. It showed a medic lying flat in volcanic glass, passing oxygen masks through a gap too narrow for her shoulders. It showed teachers from an orbital station tying themselves to cable lines and descending into a broken school district while debris still fell from the upper layers. No one in the chamber spoke. This was before Earth's fleet arrived, Elian said. Before the inquiry was notified. Before the Dominion filed its first version of events. The first humans at Namaris Reach were not soldiers. They were people who heard children counting in the dark and decided the universe could wait for paperwork. Tovan Arl lowered his head, not in submission, but in the private shame of a man who had spent his life investigating crimes and suddenly understood that procedure had limited grief. The projection shifted again. A rescue worker emerged from a black access tunnel carrying a child whose face was hidden behind a fogged mask. Another child followed, then another. Then 3 more, wrapped in emergency foil. The counter on the rescue feed climbed slowly. 48, 79, 136, 211, 312. When the final number appeared, the chamber did not cheer. Could not. The rescue was too fragile, too late, too surrounded by the millions who had not made it. Hope entered the room, but it came limping, burned and carrying names. Elian let them look at the children. Then he said the thing that turned hope back into dread. Vault 17 heard everything. Theron's aides stopped moving. Elian faced the chamber. For 17 days, while the Dominion told the galaxy Namaris Reach was dead, those children sat under the Eastern School District with Maripel and recorded every pulse, every cutter, every ground transmission, every officer who came looking for them. They recorded the command that ordered Vault 2 sealed. They recorded the unit that burned Vault 6. They recorded the phrase, "The Dominion keeps trying to bury." The magistrate's voice was barely audible. What phrase? Elian looked at Theron, and this time the human did not look tired. He looked certain. Ash Vale remains incomplete until the witnesses stop breathing. The phrase did not sound like strategy when Elian Rusk spoke it. It sounded like a door opening beneath the floor. Ash Vale remains incomplete until the witnesses stop breathing. For a moment, the Galactic Inquiry Chamber became a place without politics. The great alliances, the border kingdoms, the predator observers, the trade delegates with their polished neutrality, even the Kryth representatives who had spent hours shaping murder into procedure all sat beneath Maripel's frozen face and understood that the massacre of Namaris Reach had never been isolated. Children had not been hunted through stone because a battlefield had become messy. They had been hunted because they had heard the name of something larger than one grave. Ambassador Vake Theron moved first. He did not rise in outrage this time. He reached toward his private console with the small, precise motion of someone who had stopped performing for the room and begun trying to survive it. The movement lasted half a second before 3 tribunal security beams locked onto his hands. Elian saw it, but he did not look surprised. That absence of surprise spread more fear than any accusation could have. The Kryth Dominion had hidden fleets, forged lists, sealed ruins, and wrapped extermination in law. The human had walked into the chamber with one cracked beacon, and every time the Dominion tried to bury something, he seemed already beside the grave. The presiding magistrate's voice was unsteady when he asked, "Commander Rusk, what is Ash Vale?" Elian let the silence hold for one breath too long. "A pattern," he said. "A doctrine. A method for removing frontier populations without declaring war." Theron's legal advisors erupted, but the magistrate silenced them with a trembling hand. Another projection rose above the table. It was not a map of Namaris Reach. It was a map of the border sectors around KRH space, and scattered across it were 12 dim markers, each labeled with a name that belonged to a world no one had come to save in time. Soveral Bend, Mugate, Laken Drift, Marrow Spindle, Harthuan Wells, Vela 9. Each name appeared with a date, a population estimate, an official explanation, and a final transmission classification. Reactor bloom, volcanic failure, navigation collapse, internal violence, atmospheric poisoning, different causes, different species, different years, all close enough to carriage routes to be dismissed as border misfortune, and all far enough from power to be mourned quietly. The chamber did not react all at once. Recognition came unevenly, and that made it worse. One delegate made a soft sound when her own colony's name appeared. Another pressed both hands to his mouth. A third stood, then sat again, as if his body had tried to deny the information before his mind could accept it. Tovan Arl stared at the map like an investigator seeing 12 closed cases reopen at the same time. Elian's voice remained controlled. Earth did not discover this because we are wiser than you. We discovered it because Namaris Reach listened to dead stars, and because humans have a habit that empires find inconvenient. We keep old grief alive until it answers. Tharuan's face hardened. You dare imply the Dominion conducted extermination operations across neutral borders? No, Elian said. I imply nothing. I am showing you the geometry. The projection shifted. Lines extended from the 12 lost colonies toward abandoned transit corridors, then toward hidden carriage fuel stations, then toward the Vare Hollow where Namaris Reach had detected impossible movement. The shape that formed above the chamber was delicate and monstrous, a web of quiet routes designed to let fleets appear near isolated settlements, erase them, and vanish before treaties could wake. Each colony recorded a distortion before it died, Elian said. Most recordings were too damaged to matter alone. A broken sensor here. A gravity echo there. A child's emergency ping misfiled as noise. A dock worker's final note. None of it was enough for a court. So the cases are closed. His eyes moved across the chamber, and the shame followed his gaze. Earth does not close files because they are difficult. The words did not accuse the other worlds directly. That made them cut deeper. Several delegations lowered their eyes, not because humanity had insulted them, but because humanity had done what they had stopped doing. It had continued, quietly, patiently. Across years, borders, species, and dead languages, human analysts had kept listening to tragedies that did not belong to them. Then the chamber doors sealed. The lights shifted from tribunal white to emergency amber. A warning tone rolled through the station, low and heavy, and every private console filled with the same message at once. External weapons lock detected. The KRYTH fleet had arrived around the tribunal station. Through the high observation glass, distant silver shapes slid out of folded space until the stars behind the chamber were cut into pieces by warship silhouettes. They did not fire. They did not need to. Their targeting blooms unfolded like red flowers around the station's shield envelope, and every delegate understood the message before the first official transmission came through. The KRYTH Dominion demanded immediate suspension of the inquiry, deletion of all unauthorized evidence, and surrender of Commander Elian Rusk to Dominion custody for crimes of hostile fabrication. For the first time since the hearing began, some delegations looked at the human with fear that was not instinctive but practical. He had brought the truth into the room, and now the room might die with it. Tharuan stood slowly. The performance had returned to him, but now it was thinner, stretched over panic. This is your final opportunity, Commander. Withdraw the false evidence, and the Dominion will permit this station to remain neutral. Elian looked past him, through the observation glass, at the warships surrounding thousands of civilians, judges, translators, aides, and witnesses. His face did not harden. It softened, and that frightened the predator species most of all, because mercy in a human face did not mean surrender. Sometimes it meant the choice had already been made. He touched the cracked beacon one last time. The child's voice returned, barely louder than breath. 9. 17. Then Marapel's voice followed, weak but clear enough to enter history. If they come to the station too, it means the map is true. Tharuan's eyes widened before he could stop them. Elian turned back to the ambassador. Yes, he said quietly. That is what we were waiting to confirm. Outside the glass, the HFY warships completed their firing formation, and every human relay hidden across the border sectors woke at once. The HFY firing formation completed itself with the elegance of a ritual execution. Through the tribunal station's high observation glass, silver warships settled into a perfect crescent around the shield envelope, their red targeting blooms overlapping until the stars beyond them looked wounded. Inside the Galactic Inquiry Chamber, hundreds of delegates sat beneath emergency amber lights and understood that neutrality had become a decoration. The Kryth Dominion had not come to argue anymore. It had come to decide what history would be allowed to remember. Ambassador Vake Tharuan seemed to recover strength from the sight of his fleet. His shoulders rose. His throat membranes steadied. Around him, the HFY aides who had been drowning in evidence lifted their faces again, not because they had disproved anything, but because weapons had arrived to interrupt the need for proof. That had always been the oldest language of the Empire. When the record turned against you, threaten the room holding the record. The presiding magistrate demanded the Dominion withdraw its weapons lock. His voice traveled through the chamber system with legal authority, but it reached the warships as a suggestion and returned unanswered. More alerts filled the station feed. Shield strain increasing. Civilian evacuation routes blocked. Docking arms sealed by external interference. 3 neutral medical vessels denied departure. The tribunal station, built to prevent wars from beginning, had become a hostage at the center of one. Tharuan turned toward Elian Rusk. You have made your point, Commander. Humanity has displayed its grief. You have won sympathy. Now end this before your obsession kills everyone in this chamber. Elian looked at him for a long moment. There was no triumph in his expression. That unsettled Tovan Arl more than hatred would have. Triumph would have meant the human wanted this moment. Rage would have meant he was being pulled by pain. But Elian's face held neither. He looked like a man standing at the end of a road he had prayed would not be necessary, and walked anyway because the alternative was leaving children unheard in the dark. You still think this is about sympathy, Elian said. Tharuan's eyes narrowed. It is about survival. Yes, Elian said. But not yours alone. The first HFY warship lost power before anyone understood what had happened. Its targeting bloom vanished. Then its running lights cut out. The enormous vessel drifted half a degree out of formation, silent and suddenly blind, like a predator whose nervous system had forgotten the shape of its own body. A second ship followed. Then a third. Across the crescent, red weapon locks blinked away one by one. Panic reached the Kryth delegation before the explanation did. Tharuan spun toward the observation glass. His aides began shouting into sealed channels, but their voices came back as dead carrier tones. Outside the station, the proud crescent formation fractured without an explosion, without a beam, without any visible attack. The warships remained intact. Their crews remained alive. Their weapons remained mounted. But every path connecting command to action had been cut. Elian touched his wrist console, and a new projection opened above the evidence table. It was not the map of the 12 dead colonies. It was larger. The border sectors appeared in pale blue, threaded by hundreds of faint transit lines. Then, one by one, portions of the network turned dark around Kryth military routes. Gate junctions closed. Fuel corridors locked. Relay chains folded into silence. Warfleets stationed far from the tribunal vanished from command visibility. Not destroyed, not harmed, but stranded exactly where they were. The chamber watched an empire stop moving. Tharuan's voice cracked through his translator. What have you done? Elian did not look away from the map. What Namaris Reach died proving could be done. The projection zoomed toward the very hollow, the abandoned corridor where the civilian observatory had detected impossible movement 6 days before the massacre. Elian expanded the old maintenance data, and suddenly the strange distortions were no longer isolated anomalies. They were fingerprints, gate manipulation signatures, hidden beneath dead star noise, repeated across every colony listed in Ash Vale. Each vanished settlement had been approached through illegal microroutes carved into supposedly dead corridors. The Dominion had built secret roads through the dark and used them to make murder look like an accident. Namaris Reach did not have weapons, Elian said. It had patience. It listened longer than your engineers expected anyone to listen. Heard the routes. It mapped the distortions. It sent the pattern before your fleet burned the surface. Tovan Arl whispered almost to himself. The colony did not record a massacre. It recorded the Empire's hidden skeleton. Elian heard him and nodded. And after Vault 17 was opened, the children's recordings gave us the final confirmations. Every ground pulse, every command burst, every attempt to find and silence the witnesses. The Dominion did not merely attack a colony. It authenticated the entire map while trying to erase it. Tharuan stepped back as if the projection gave off heat. You cannot blockade a sovereign empire. We are not blockading your empire, Elian said. We are isolating military assets connected to an extermination network under emergency anti-genocide authority recognized by this chamber's founding charter. The magistrate looked stunned, then horrified, then suddenly old. He understood before most others did. Earth had not improvised this response. It had not acted in rage after the Carriage fleet arrived. Every legal clause, every signal lock, every relay awakening across the border had been prepared while the Dominion lied. Humanity had not needed the Chamber's permission to be angry. It had needed the Chamber's record to make action undeniable. Tharuan turned to the magistrate. Stop this. The magistrate did not answer. He was staring at the darkened transit lines where carriage fleets hung suspended across half a sector, unable to retreat, unable to reinforce, unable to burn another colony before the truth reached it. Around the chamber, delegates from the 12 marked worlds began receiving messages from home. Old grief files reopened. Missing colony archives restored. Emergency memorial channels activated. Names once buried beneath official uncertainty started appearing on public walls across distant systems. The Kryth Dominion had surrounded one station to silence a hearing. Humanity had used the moment to make the entire galaxy listen. Elian looked at Tharuan, and now the room saw the full shape of Earth's response. It was not a starkiller. It was not revenge unleashed in blind fire. It was restraint sharpened into a blade so precise that it cut only the hand still reaching for the knife. Your fleets are alive, Elian said. Your civilian worlds are untouched. Your children are not targets. Your hospitals still have power. Your food routes remain open. Remember that when you explain to your people what humans did after you murdered ours. Tharuan's voice dropped into something raw and private. And what happens to us now? Before Elian could answer, the cracked beacon activated again. Marapel's final recording surfaced through static, weaker than ever, but clear enough for every species in the chamber to hear. If Earth finds this, do not let them become what came for us. Elian closed his eyes, and the entire chamber waited to learn whether humanity would obey the dead or avenge them. For the first time since Namaris Reach had burned, the chamber did not look at Earth with fear of what humans might do. It looked at Earth with fear of what humans had the strength not to do. Elian Rusk stood beneath the frozen map of the Carriage military network, eyes still closed, Marapel's final words hanging over him like the hand of the dead on his shoulder. Do not let them become what came for us. The entire tribunal waited in a silence so complete that even the emergency alarms seemed to lower themselves around it. Ambassador Vake Tharuan watched him with something close to desperation, because in that moment the Kryth Dominion's survival depended not on its fleets, not on its treaties, not on its lies, but on the restraint of the species it had tried to break. When Elian opened his eyes, the chamber saw no mercy in them. Not the soft kind. Not the forgiving kind. What they saw was harder and cleaner than mercy. It was judgment under control. Earth will not target care-wage civilian worlds, he said. A sound moved through the room, small and involuntary, like hundreds of bodies remembering how to breathe. Elian continued. Earth will not bombard your cities. Earth will not poison your atmosphere. Earth will not erase your children to balance the number of hours. Your hospitals will remain powered. Your food corridors will remain open. Your evacuation routes will remain protected. Your people will be told the truth before your government tells them we are monsters. Tharuan's face twisted, not with relief, but with something worse. Shame had found a crack in him, and it entered like light. Elian turned from him to the magistrate. But every military vessel connected to Ash Vale remains locked. Every command officer named in the Vault 17 recordings is to be detained. Every hidden gate route is now public record. Every colony erased under false cause is to be reopened as a criminal archive. Every child recovered from Namaris Reach will speak only if they choose. And every world that lost people to the Dominion will receive full access to the evidence Earth has kept. The presiding magistrate did not speak at first. He looked at the 12 colony names still glowing above the tribunal floor. 12 worlds that had been allowed to become accidents because accidents were easier to mourn than crimes. Then he looked at the delegates from those worlds, some standing now, some weeping without sound, some staring at the map as if their dead had just knocked from the other side of history. At last, the magistrate called for an emergency vote. No one expected it to be fast. Interstellar law was slow by design. It was meant to cool blood before blood became policy. But that day, the vote moved through the chamber like fire finding dry grass. The Mirel Union voted first. Then the Lethros combine. Then the Vor Pact, whose admiral had not taken his eyes off Elian since the first moment the human crossed the floor. One by one, the neutral worlds, border alliances, trade systems, and old predatory powers voted to suspend KRYTH military sovereignty under the Anti-Extermination Statute. When the final vote was registered, the chamber lights shifted from emergency amber to tribunal white. The Kryth Dominion had not been destroyed, had been exposed. That was worse for those who had survived by darkness. Across the border sectors, care-wage civilians began receiving the full record. Not edited human propaganda. Not revenge broadcast. The record. Orders. Audio. The final maintenance note from Marapel. The child counting in Vault 17. The sealed list. The false list. The ships that had surrounded the tribunal station. The moment their weapons went dark while their cities remained untouched. Within hours, care-wage civilian councils began refusing military orders. Within a day, 3 command worlds opened their archives. Within 2, the first care-wage mothers gathered outside a Dominion war office holding signs with human numbers written in their own language. 17. In the chamber, Tharuan lowered himself slowly into his chair. The empire behind him was not burning. That was the part he could not understand. Humanity had taken away its knife and left it alive to face the people it had wounded. Then Elian touched the cracked beacon again. A live transmission opened above the evidence table. The chamber saw a medical recovery ward orbiting Earth. Soft white lights, rows of small beds. Human nurses moving quietly between them. Children from Vault 17 sat wrapped in blankets, some with breathing masks still resting beneath their chins, some holding hands, some staring with the hollow seriousness of those who had learned too early that adults could fail and still be worth trusting again. At the center sat a girl with cropped dark hair and a scar along her temple. She held a repaired audio slate in both hands. Elian's face changed when he saw her. Only slightly, but enough. The girl looked toward the recording device, then down at the slate. Her voice trembled once before steadying. Mara said numbers help when the dark gets loud. No one in the chamber moved. She pressed play. The final complete recording from Vault 17 filled the tribunal. Not the KRYTH command. Not the screams. Not the collapse. Children counting together. Weak voices, frightened voices, stubborn voices. 17. 17. Over and over, not because numbers could save them but because numbers could keep them human until someone came. And someone had come. Elian stood alone beneath that sound, carrying 12 million dead, 312 living witnesses, and the impossible weight of a species that had every reason to become monstrous and had chosen instead to become exact. When the recording ended, he picked up the cracked beacon and turned to leave. This time no one laughed. No one whispered about young species or emotional primates or fragile frontier worlds. Every predator in the chamber watched the human cross the floor with the same ancient certainty that had unsettled them from the beginning. They understood now. Humanity was not terrifying because it could destroy a star system. Humanity was terrifying because even under ash, even in grief, even when the whole galaxy expected rage, humans kept listening. And once they heard a child counting in the dark, they did not stop.